Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again one of Macon, Georgia's leading savants and all-around man of the world, Dr. Bob
Citizen of the world.
All right. Okay.
How are you tonight?
Okay, we've had lots of conversations about different things, and one thing that's emerged that at least interests me is the origin of the coronavirus, which killed over 1 million people in the U.S. and scores of millions of people around the world, and also had a substantial impact on everything, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So one can say we've had famine in some places as the food supplies have been altered, and we've had terrible amounts of hatred that have sprung from this, and indeed war. So all these bad things have happened, terrible events, and obviously, as far as anyone can say, and I believe this is perceived wisdom, the virus arose in Wuhan, China, a town of 10 million people, where the Chinese government has put there's a university there and something similar to NIH, and also their number one location for studying viruses. And so they've been doing something there. And then, as I understand this, in around November of 2019, 3 people that worked in the around the viruses got sick, and in the laboratory, and allegedly these were the first 3 people that were sick, and so that certainly raises some suspicion about what happened. And then this veil of secrecy sort of appeared. And it's apparently, no one knows this, but people were dropping dead in the streets in Wuhan. And then within a flick of an eye, this virus went around the world and disrupted the world order, had all cosmic changes took place. So one could argue this event in Wuhan was one of the most spectacular bad things that have happened to humanity in a century, right up there with, you could make a case of the world wars. That's how terrible it was. And then discovering what occurred is obviously of substantial interest. The fact that this happens, it certainly common sense would raise the issue, did this really, was the lab involved in this? And there's some evidence along those lines in that the U.S. had supported the lab to some degree. U.S. money was going into the lab. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And the Americans went there and then said the normal degree of strictness that it should be a grade 5 to say that, and this was at a much lower level, grade 3. So it appears that these things happened, and common sense would say it appears they could play a major role in the events that took place. And indeed, Dr. Harold Kattner, several years ago, before when this thing just happened, and we should have him back for another conversation, who said, well, it appears to me it was related to the lab. Almost immediately after that, any kind of discussion to say this came from the lab was poo-pooed. And there was a great article in Lancet signed by Nature, I take that back, in Nature, even a more prestigious journal. You could make the case that Lancet, or I said Lancet, I got to stop that. Nature was the most prestigious biological journal in the world. It's published in the UK, its standards are extraordinary, and about more or less 50 scientists shortly thereafter put an article in Nature saying, this is absolutely, had nothing to do with the lab, and this was a animal to human transmission. And their argument, based on many factors, but the major one was that in China there had been several bad arrangements that had occurred, and SARS was one such problem, and there had been several others, and so the transmission, their view would be that logically it would come from through an animal vector. So the idea would be the bats would maybe infect all kinds of strange animals were put in the hopper. I'll say goats, stranger than goats. I mean, I don't know, porcupines maybe. Some very strange animal, the vector, and that's how things happened. And then that argument was basically powerfully put out right at the time this occurred. And all kinds of discussion were pretty much closed down, and this became a political issue. The Democrats particularly thought that you could make the case. It would be a racist way if you were a racist and you disliked people of other ethnic origins, and the Chinese are out there. Well, only a racist would say that this is what happened, because it would demean the Chinese people. And of course you're not one, so it really closed the door on a lot of what happened. And indeed, a number of government agencies looked into the situation to say, we think that it was not a lab problem. And in any event, the time has passed, 3 years or so, and some of the things that have happened in the meantime have been, no animals have turned up. There haven't been, everyone has been searching for an animal that would be a porcupine that had been, that would be the vector between the bats and humans. And that hasn't happened. The other thing that's been said is that this virus is very different than the SARS. SARS has killed, I'll make a number, I don't know, 1,000 people, and it had a hard time going from human to human. It just did. It could do it, but it was quite clumsy at it. The coronavirus had exquisite abilities, very, very unusual, to just go everywhere. A very unusual kind of virus, and I won't get into the particulars since it's past my knowledge. But more or less, it's said that the way the virus works, it can really hook up to humans better than almost anything, and it would imply that people would say this, that somebody had done a gain of I guess, abilities. They'd done something to hop up the virus.
It's engineered, in short.
In a laboratory with a gain of function kind of thing. And the idea, well, we're going to configure the virus into something that'll help us understand the way these viruses function. And then they were extraordinarily successful in doing that, really successful. And the way they monitored the virus arrangements in that laboratory were very inferior and suspect. And so they created kind of a sorcerer's apprentice arrangement. It was exactly humans blundering into this. They made this deadly thing, not understanding what it would do, and then it leaked out. It basically killed a number of people that worked in the lab, and then spread like wildfire everywhere. And the government did not stop. It didn't lock things down, so it went all over the world. And indeed, later there were this big lockdown that took place in China, and one could say, in some ways, this was guilt playing itself out. That the officials felt guilty they hadn't locked things down, and they overcompensated in the other direction. Well, in any event, that's some of what's out there. And right now, there are 5 government agencies that allegedly, or some number like that say, well, this is probably from animals. And there have been at least 2 agencies that have come out on the other side of this recently, saying we believe it's likely a lab event. And the problem is, which also points to this being something that's quite suspicious, is the Chinese government absolutely refuses to collaborate or do anything. And one of the things that happened in the middle of all this is there was a WHO group that came to sort of look it over, and they had just the most superficial look at the place. And then they said, well, the lab didn't do it. So it was kind of a Potemkin kind of thing, Potemkin village, I guess you'd say, where they were making the case that, oh, well, for sure. And then the book is closed. So now a question to be asked about this is, was there suppression? Do the governments, and I've spoken more than I normally would, but I'll pull you into the conversation. Do governments suppress information that would disturb the tranquility of the population? So if, in fact, when everyone was dying, and the idea was this is racist, and President Trump attempted to call this the Chinese virus or whatever, and so all the people that were against this kind of demonizing the out group just jumped on this. Well, we can't let that happen. And so, and also, when all these people were dying, all the people on the street dropping dead, or the terrible travail, we can't go to school, where's the food, we're locked up, we can't go have a mask on, we're locked up in our room. And the Chinese did that. Then that would have a terrible world event. I mean, it would encourage world war. And so I'll ask the question, was there a sort of plot reasonably put there? What difference did it make, so to speak, if this happened in the lab or it happened whatever, it's out there. And what we don't want to have out of this is a collision between nations. And we'll believe that this was a screw-up, and we have our own screw-ups. This is a colossal Chinese screw-up. But we don't want to bring it up because that will sour relationships, particularly because of the economic relationship that exists between China and American capitalism. And the Chinese products are keeping inflation down. Everyone's benefiting from this relationship. The economic thing is a great, wonderful thing for the world. All those things might implode. So we're just going to not let the cat out of the bag, and that includes all of the media and all the media people that, and of course this plays into the paranoia story. So presumably, if you're a big poobah at a media company, you want the best for the world. You don't want dissension. You don't hatred. None of that. And of course, you don't want that. And so, what good is it going to do to get the truth out or put it out there? It'll just cause trouble. Particularly, we're not sure of everything. We don't have all our facts right.
Well, I'm going to have to bust
jump
in there. I'm sorry, but
I've had my little monologue, and
well,
you can jump.
Yeah, you wrote this very fascinating book recently about the world brain.
Right.
And I think the basic assumption in that book that I've always had trouble with is that everyone's going to be a rational actor. And so I want to start at the tail end of what you said there.
Well, I'm not sure that was you.
I think so, but why would you say that all the media people want what's best for the world? The media people want to get rich. All the media people want to get rich, or at least I'd say the vast majority of them. I mean, I refer back to the Spanish-American War. And so to see the media, I mean, even if you want to take the sort of Trumpist, sort of right-wing Republican view that the mainstream media is all on the same page and they swing left, even granting that for the sake of argument, you can be the renegade big news agency that if you break the big story, if you're the National Enquirer and spills the beans about Monica Lewinsky, you're going to clean up. And the idea that there is no one out there who would subscribe to that, I think is a little far-fetched.
Well, so. I'll clean my comment up slightly. Yes, there are all kinds of motives out there, and I was attempting to put the best spin on how things had happened here. And, I think that's a true thing to look into. I really believe that. If you're looking in, firstly, all kinds of opinions are accessible. For instance, tonight, I mean, we could say we're the media. Every kind of thing is out there. There are millions of ways that people communicate with one another, zillions of them, the internet, and so there are all kinds of ways that information is being passed around. But I think there's something called standard perceived wisdom, whatever that is, the standard perceived wisdom. And so and that standard, one of the cards in the deck at the highest level of, I think, responsible media. And what I'm going to say are the big, the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever else you want, ABC, NBC, whatever, not C-SPAN.
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into the works, throw Fox in there as well.
Well, now Fox is on the other side, but I get it. So yes, we do have collisions of ideas there, but the perceived wisdom on the subject, and this was a world crisis, and so to speak. So it's true enough that greed plays its role and knavery or whatever, but the chips were down in early 2020. And so there are all these terrific, it was just a bit of crisis and catastrophe. And I believe that this is something past normal mercantile experience. And how people are going to respond to this enormous crisis. And at the highest level, I think people would say, I don't want to really go too far out there on the lab. And certainly people said that, they did it. But the government, on their part of view, playing in this relationship they have with media and this sort of establishment arrangements that in many ways control the American dialogue, not totally, but I think it's fair to say there's a certain direction of our national psyche that comes out of universities, it comes out of foundations, it comes up the area between Boston and Washington, the establishment forces, and the government and of different sorts, and also people in Western Europe. There's sort of a nexus of power and control that's there, and that the people that were in that particular milieu could see that this was not anything that needed to be added to the crisis. That to get into this, and the government was saying, and all of the people that would pass opinions on this, give you some kind of opinion about it, would say, well, I'm an expert. This is my life's work looking into this. This is obviously an animal to human event, not something out of the lab, even though a person could say, isn't this strange that that virus came right out of this area? First, Sherlock Holmes would wonder, are we getting a Sherlock Holmes look into it? Okay.
Well, yeah, but aren't there other experts who are saying, no, this is absolutely not animal spillover? And you talk about, what was the phrase you used? Conventionally received wisdom. Perceived wisdom. It was perceived wisdom 150 years ago that Newton was the last word in physics. So you can't just trust the establishment, and especially when you bring in different perspectives, and then on top of that you bring in different agendas. And when you add to that, China is, when you get right down to it, still an authoritarian country, and whatever the cause of this, whether it be animal spillover or whether it be a lab experiment gone wrong, China stands to end up really embarrassed as it is trying to make itself the ultimate great player on the world stage, the wave of the future. It is naturally going to want to cover up, which I think leads us to one of the big problems. This may be, other than I think the danger of artificial intelligence becoming sentient in the future. This may be the great problem that plagues humanity. And it's an epistemological problem with all of these voices out there screaming and relying on specialists and studies and this and that, and all being agenda driven. How are you really going to know what the truth is? And yes, okay, so let's say that corporate America is all mostly on the same page when it comes to the media outlets and are going to try to peddle the same sort of general idea. But it has never been easier at any time in our history for the little person to get out his opinions, whether those opinions have a solid basis in science and fact or whether they're conspiracy theories. So I think it's really hard to just be able to say, all right, we're going to tell the entire American public or the world public what they must believe. I think there was a time when you could really do that. I mentioned the Spanish-American War earlier. I mean, for a brief time, you had a relatively few corporations that had an absolute lock on what tens of millions of Americans read. That the American media really did start that war in order to sell newspapers. But I think with the internet, with anybody being able to put a blog together or have their own web server, I think we've moved beyond that now. But if the specialists are even disagreeing, and if China, the host country, has all sort of political incentive not to cooperate, then the possibility of ever really getting to the truth is, there's going to be speculation. So.
Well, now you've used a word of great import, which is one that needs a lot of attention, and that's truth. So it's very, very hard for many reasons to actually get to the truth. And the truth would imply knowledge of causality. Causality is so complicated. So it really is an elusive alpine flower.
And to make it even harder, maybe the Chinese could have gone out into the wild, found a virus that they think would have a great chance of spillover, and then engineered it further. So it could be a little of both, I guess. So.
Well, that's right. So maybe where one could springboard our conversation, jumping into truth, very hard to obtain. The second thing is the need for mythology. Or myth. And so, many times the truth is contrary to public interest, if I could phrase it that way. And this may be one of those cases. And so people that are purveyors of at least perceived wisdom to pass along to people, they often could say, well, yes, there's some of this story could be construed in a wrong way. And the idea of the way it would be construed in the wrong way, well, this is deliberate act, which some people have proposed, and you can hear it a little bit now, is that also the Chinese military had at least a lab also in the same building. So maybe the Chinese were trying to get it was something even more sinister, which I don't think there's any evidence for that we're aware of. Although, I mean, that it brings up the issues which are important, I think, in this, and this is the sorcerer's apprentice kind of thing. What's going on around the world right now with other people that are going to blunder into something? Are they going to blunder into some terrible nuclear accident? Are they going to whatever they're up to? Fusion? Are they going to blow the earth up playing around? Or people, there are many ways that this could happen. But I think the governments and their allies that are in the same boat with them, which would be large, responsible media organizations, foundations, companies, as far as that go, that subscribe to the idea they have substantial social responsibility to be peacemakers and higher ideals of, and if there's a fact that appears that's contrary to that, then the impulse is to dismiss it.
Well, I would counter that by saying that even granting your premise that most of the major media organizations in cahoots with government feel this sense of social responsibility, their definitions of social responsibility are going to be all over the place. So, do you remember Capricorn 1? It was it was a military cover-up movie of the late 70s about the Mars shot, and that some reporter just found a little small fact that didn't jibe, and from there he began to realize that the entire Mars shot had been a fabrication. And as he moved closer and closer to being able to unveil that, the government came after him to kill him. I will not spoil it for anybody who wants to go back and watch that. It was coming out of the Watergate period, and the government being the bad guy. But this is the thing, that there are so many different perspectives and so many ideas, and there are so many ideologies out there, political parties who really do sort of follow the Rahm Emanuel idea of never letting a crisis go to waste, that they can take this and twist it in many different directions. So the idea of having some sort of international consensus that we must do this to save world order, I'm afraid I simply can't subscribe to. Somebody out there would rattle the cage.
Well, I mean, yes, there are all kinds of centrifugal forces out there. And there are all kinds of opinions out there. But there is, if you want to use the word world order, there is some kind of instrumentality that has a major role in the way our 8 billion people walk around. It's out there to lesser and greater degree, and this was a crisis that affected all of the 8 billion people. Mm-hmm. It was a huge deal, and the one thing that anybody, and including me, would not want to have happen is that the way we're going to now blame the Chinese for this and do something bad to them, and I think policymakers and decision makers are worried about the irrationality of our species, how they can be manipulated into evil deeds. Mm-hmm. And so I think that played a role at a higher level. And what I really want to get into is the limits that are imposed. One thing I'd like to discuss is, briefly, is the John F. Kennedy, what happened there? And I won't challenge the normal story on this. But apparently some...
What is the normal story? But I'm sorry, go ahead.
One guy, all that stuff, whatever the perceived wisdom on this is. One guy, and no impact from the Soviet Union, had no role in this, even though the guy had been in the Soviet Union, was certainly a communist, a Marxist, and had been to the right.
Well, I know I'm digressing here, but I think this does sort of illustrate it, that the Warren Commission gave you the perceived wisdom, but then 10 years later, the Select Committee on Assassinations, equally valid, the same caliber of people went in a vastly different direction.
What I want to do is quote some of the stuff that came out of the Warren Commission. Mm-hmm. They had tapes or whatever, people discussing this. Mm-hmm. And in that discussion, you could hear the senators say, look, the last thing we want to do is bring the Soviet Union into this. Mm-hmm. We're just going to cool that out. We're not going to make any inquiries about that. And the reason is it would stir people up so much. This could really lead to some catastrophes. Mm-hmm. So our report is going to really soft pedal the whole deal here, and just cool it and go to the next point. And I think something similarly, in a way, transpired in the lab leak.
Well, if I could take a parting shot here, assuming that Osama bin Laden had still been around, would he have had a motivation to upset the New World Order by breaking the real story? Kim Jong-un, now he's a client state of China,
right?
But if he were not in that client state arrangement, would he have any compunction? In fact, I would say that he would have a positive motivation to break the real story. So I just don't think even if you've got this general consensus, there are going to be plenty of irrational actors out there who, with plenty of resources to fight back. And
I'm going to conclude a little bit here. Maybe this is the way the limbic lobe works in the brain is like a cyclotron. Mm-hmm. So maybe, I don't know, the dog. I don't know what your dog does something to it, bites your foot or whatever the deal is, and you initially think, and then You get, and this is the 5th time the dog's done it. The dog's terrible. I don't like this dog. And it takes about 30 seconds to get into a boiling rage. Well, if you just shortstop that without getting there, I think the response could, under some circumstances, the right chemical reaction, all these millions of people dying, if people had been saying, every death here is the fault of the Chinese, the same way in the Middle Ages when plague came through, well, the Jewish people did this. We'll have to go get someone, or the anger or displacement, which is a real way that the humans work, the way their psyche works. All of the distress could have been displaced against the Chinese, or in the Kennedy assassination against the Soviet Union. And decision makers or people that were trying to guide the world's destiny just backed away from, if you want to say this, a lot of the nuances of what you could say was true. For a bigger reason.
Well, I'm sure there were people like that, but I'm not sure that would explain the whole story.
Okay, well, we had a good conversation on this, so welcome once again.
Right on. Thank you, sir.
Take care. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.